Hello folks, old Buster coming to you again. This is the trip. Can't dance too wet to plow and the mule's pregnant. Well now don't that beat all. Reckon that about says it all when it comes to singing, drawing pictures, or roller skating. Buster can do a lot of things, but those ain't them. Walter don't like no reading, and neither does Hired, but Jesse does. Buster and Jesse does all the writing when it comes to it for the fellers. Walter's awful good at ciphering and just plain figuring. Hired likes things that give him a run for his and money, so no job is too tough for him. Fact is, he likes to take the ones nobody else wants. Now, Buster's best friends always come along with him when they have to be around doing anything, and especially when they was all youngins. And seemed like Walter and Jesse was the littlest of the bunch, whilst Hired was in the middle and Buster was the biggest by far. Now, Walter sprung up like a weed after he done got out of high school. He was a little feller, about 120 pounds, 5'5" or 5'6". Jesse was a mite smaller, but both them boys would and could scrap. Walter was a mite more to get in on the mix than Jesse, but when you got Jesse riled up, he'd make you think you was a grabbing a bobcat. Now, Jesse's ma was kind of worried about him and all, so she up and carried him off to the doctor. Well, when the boy got on in there, he done hollered out, "She won't feed me." Now, if in that didn't take his ma by surprise. Of course, the doctor knowed Jesse's folks, and that his and ma was one fine cook, and by the looks of his and two sisters, they had plenty of victuals. Jesse just didn't fancy certain things to eat, and sure enough, it ain't changed to this day. Jesse don't like nothing that crunches again his teeth, his ma says, and he sure enough don't like no corn, and he don't like nothing sappy. Now, Buster would eat Jesse, so his plate would be clean when he was over, and he didn't like no steak and roast beef neither, so Buster'd eat theirs too. Both theirs. Well, Jesse dearly loved hamburgers, though. He even eat them for breakfast. And don't even take Jesse to no car wash, I tell you. He gets plumb fractious over them things. Well, Hired Walter ain't nearly as picky about victuals as Buster. Has a little quirkful nature too, though. Don't give that boy no liver, no beets, 'cause he'll like to gag a gopher. Says them beets taste like dirt, and there just ain't no describing liver. Buster's real partial to sweets, and especially pie. Sweet tater pie, fried peach pie, pecan pie, coconut pie is his most favorite. Buster's ma always made him a pineapple upside down cake when he had a birthday, and he figured that was just about every week when he was little. Walter would even eat raw onions right out the garden, and he got Hired to eat one 'cause he was sick and said it would cure old Hired. Well, on the way to the house, he got sicker than a yeller dog, and I do mean commode hugging sick. Well, Hired figured Walter done tricked him again, but he didn't that time. He was just trying to help out, but it didn't do nothing but clean Hired out. Hired don't eat no onion no more neither. Well, don't rightly know how I got to telling on the boys, but it goes to show you some about them though. All them boys was a one-woman man too, and was just raised right about them sort of things. Walter's Uncle Jeff took a shine to him. That was awful good, 'cause it seemed Uncle Jeff was kind of vexed at times. He was a government man or army or something, and sure would tell Walter some exciting things that he would tell the boys. Jesse's grandpa was a good one too, like Buster's. They'd carry them boys with them everywhere. Well, Hired rode motorcycles and raced all the time, got to be right good, and it was going to be professional till he wrecked up and busted out his front teeth and broke a pile of bones to boot. He laid up for a spell and decided that was enough of that for him, excepting just for fun. Now, old Walter had been throwed a few times himself, busted up some ribs, knocked his shoulder out of socket. Buster was always beat up with tussling or working or playing football. And Jesse was in good shape till he done got the diabetes. Buster got the fatness, Walter got the gout. Hired got some hurts too, and I guess they come by it honest, as they was into something all the time. One thing about it though, their cull piles weren't very big when it come to work. They'd tackle anything. Their paws had to make them quit at night, and they just wouldn't stop till their work was done. It didn't make no never mind what kind of job they was put on. They'd get her done. All them boys rode horses and plowed with mules, but Walter done it every day and has all his in life, but not like his and big brother Ike. Like I told you before, Walter won't ride nothing but a gray. Well, Hired and Buster dearly loved speed. Walter liked to gum around, and so did Jesse. You can bet your bottom dollar Hired and Buster was leading the pack, and the race was on to see who got there first. Don't know if y'all ever been around a dryer before, but Buster's grandpa Gus had one where they took all their rice and soybeans and some of the other farmers' crop too. When it come a rain, the water would drain to the elevator leg and stand. Now somebody had to climb down to the bottom and dip it out and clean out all that mess it made. Stink to high heaven, I tell you. There'd be all manner of dead critters in there, chickens and rats and dogs and millions of skippers and snakes sometimes. You just had to hunker down and reach up in there and get to pulling it out. When Buster got home after he'd done the job, his grandma would scrub him with vinegar and lemon juice to get rid of the smell. But it had to be done, you know. Walter had to custom cut with his paw, and he ornated the ropes with the hobos like I said before. Met all kinds of fellers down on their luck and worked all kinds at that. They had all had something to teach him. That's what Walter told the boys. Well, Hired went to working with his new pa in the dirt business. Jesse, I'm a spilling the beans, went to lawyering school, but he sure enough did his part when he was growing up, just doing chores and make a living, enough said. I'm finally getting to the point about telling about this trip them boys done took. Just remember when them boys set their minds to something, they can be mule stubborn, but Jesse takes the cake being set in his ways, I tell you. Not that he ain't a considering type of feller, it just takes right smart doings to change his and mine, that's for sure. You just got to prove up, you know, as the old saying goes. You can tell a tiger by his stripes. Well, Buster's right there behind him. When Walter, Walter, Hired just hangs back and don't say much. Jesse don't say much neither, but when he does, you better listen. All right, I'm a-getting there, but it just takes a bit of getting to all this straight. Well, it all started on a notion. Don't rightly know whose idea it was, but it come about and they took on off. West or east. First off, they had their maws packing some good eating victuals for the road. They was a driving Buster's Ford and had her packed to the brim. The boys done saved up some of their wages they made on the side and had a pretty fair amount of hard cash, and if you remember, some of the winnings of Buster's poker playing, plus Walter's wheeling and dealing on some hogs he had and pork bellies. So they headed on out west, pulling a homemade trailer Walter and Hired done welded up. They was a toting motorcycles and camping gear and all manner of odds and ends their maws and paws made them take. Right off the bat, they got turned around and headed on out east, ended up in Tennessee. Well, Buster and Jesse had kin people from thereabout and Kentucky as well, so they just figured that was as good a place to light as for a spell as any. Now, the Pews had a knack for making the purest blue moon you ever put a lip lock on. That liquor went down smooth as silk, but had the kick of a mule when it hit bottom. Ish, that's Cecil, that's Buster's very own first cousin, was in from racing up there in Charlotte. He said he was going to show the boys around a bit. Well, the boys got there on Saturday night. Ish says he knowed the place to go. There was a gospel singing over at the Hooper place. In their barn, they had fixed up, and they had 3 gals, pretty to the picture and tall enough to dance with. Now, the Hooper gals could sure enough sing and had a passel of their hill girlfriends to the meeting that night. Well, Ish done introduced the boys to all of them and to those gals, and they sure took a shine to the boys. There tweren't no dancing right off, but plenty of hand clapping, foot stomping, whilst the Hooper gals and their family played music or sang. Then some of the other folks around about, they started singing too. The singing and a little preaching and praying was over about the end anyway, and they was just starting a shindig. The old fiddle and banjo began to ring all around that barn, I tell you, and then a guitar jumped on in there too. There was an old piano off to the side, and a feller with red spinders was a-pounding them ivories and joined right on in. Boy, howdy, did the party take off, and the boys was sure enough a-grinning and ready for the dance. Well, Ish done whispered something soft-like to the boys to meet him on out back. Well, when they met up with Ish, he had a couple of the local boys that was his friends out there, and they all shook hands and talked a bit. Then one of the boys brought out a jug. Well, Ish told the boys to take a little swaller at that. They was in for a treat. Now, Ish didn't figure the boys knowed much about white lightning and was waiting to see their eyes roll back like wonder shades. That didn't happen to the boys, though. They could write a book on homebrew and liquor, and it was dearly loved and cherished by Buster more than any of them. Anyhow, they all got to feeling their oats, because there just wasn't no way not to get a buzz with that kind of liquor. Now, Jesse done took up to dancing at the schoolhouse, and boy was here cutting the rug with one of them Hooper gals. The middling, I think. She stood a head taller than Jesse, leastwise a foot or so. Quite a pair, I'd say. She was the biggest of the bunch, and here Jesse was the littlest of the boys. She just would not turn Jesse loose for nothing all night long. Now, Walter was a pretty dang good Texas two-step dancer himself and was not to be outdone by nobody. Now, one of the other Hooper gals sashayed up to Walter and told him he was hers, and away they went to strutting their stuff. Well, Howard weren't no dancer, but he just had to look with them little cherry red cheeks and all, dimples and all. And as the night wore on, everybody was having a high old time. But when it come time to pack up and head for home, that's when it began to get real exciting. All the folks done left, and Ish went to get his at Chivy. The boys was a saying their goodbyes and thanking Ma and Paul Hooper for their hospitality and a good time had by all. That's when Paul Hooper told the boys to sit and visit for a spell. He done told the boys that since his gals done took a liking to him, that he was a ready and for a marrying come morning. Now that made the boys about swallow their tongues, I tell you. Buster says to Paul Hooper, "What you mean to marry up with your gals?" Well, Paul Hooper says since all that sparking last night and the hugging and the kissing goings on, he said the boys just had to make it right. He says since he was a preacher, he'd marry up the whole bunch at one time. Oh boy, you got to know that begun a big and had a hold of Jesse there. Wasn't about to turn him loose now. And that little one gnashed on the water till his circulation was plumb cut off of his arm. Now the oldest one of the Hooper gals, hog-tied hired with her night shawl, all wrapped around them both, and she weren't about to let him go neither. Ooh, Ma Hooper said she would go in, make up their marrying beds, and then after the festivities and all, the chivalry would commence. Now Buster wasn't in on the marrying up since he done had this all figured out and told him he was afflicted and all. So he eases on out and catches Ish by the outhouse, told him what all was going on. Well, Ish says, "Lordy mercy, cuz, I never figured for this," but he knowed that for years them gals was looking for husbands. Ish and Buster made up a plan real quick like, and Buster told Ish he knowed just how to get the boys' attention and look to fetch them. Well, Buster knowed they'd come a running as soon as they got free of the gals. Well, Ish took that jug and poured it all around the outhouse and told Buster to get the boys when he cranked up the chivvy and come to the south side of the barn. There was an old logging road over there that he used to run shine on to get away from the police. He'd cut back over the mountain and hit the highway with tires burning, and nobody would ever catch him after that. Well, Buster and the boys had a call they heard on a Tarzan picture show, and Buster was the onlyest one of the bunch that could imitate it perfect like. It was Buster's way of gathering them in when something was afoot. Well, Ish lit a chunk and set that shine to burning, and set a ruckus you never seed the likes of started up. Ma Hooper thought the outhouse was a burning and began to screaming and a hollering and a running around like a chicken what their hay done cut off. Paul Hooper told the gals and the boys to fetch water at the well and help put out the fire. About that time, Buster let out his and Tarzan peacock call. "Ah!" And the boys let out a running towards Buster. Ish rounded the corner on two wheels in a cloud of dust and hollered, "Get in, boys." Well, Buster had the doors and windows open and the boys piled on in. Well, Jesse jumped headlong into the window and Buster pulled him on in and Walter dove in the front seat with Howard on top of him. The race was on, I tell you. About that time, they all heard a cussing and a shotgun blast over the car. Well, Ish give her the gas and down the road they went lickety-split. Ish said there wouldn't be no harm because the fire was just a ring around the outhouse and wouldn't burn nothing down at all. Well, Ish said, "Boys, I told y'all would have a high old time tonight," and sure enough they did. Have a little pull on this old jug of Grandma Pugh's, one for the road, you might say. Well, after a spell and things settled down a bit, the boys said they ain't never seen the like before this evening. What a story. Close as they ever wanted to get to a shotgun wedding, they said. Well, Ish was a-laughing and told them they needed to hear a story or two from Buster. He done had his share of mountain romance too the last time he come to visit when he took Buster to the Red Dog Saloon. Well, all the boys got on back to the house. Buster's Aunt Mamie, Ish's ma, fixed up a mighty fine breakfast, and Buster asked her if he could have some of her cornbread and biscuits and gravy for the road. She asked the boys if they was headed on out, and they said yes as soon as they was done eating. She fixed them up a right smart of groceries to take with them. They said their goodbyes to her and Uncle Roscoe and took off heading north. Well, Ish saw the boys off with just a laughing and a waving and told Buster to get on back soon. Well, Walter, Jesse, and Howard told Buster it was the dangest time to be had ever, which sure wasn't looking for another like that soon. Well, all the boys hollered, "Hater north, Buster," and off they went just as snowflakes the size of a two-bit piece took to falling. Northeast. Seeing how they got such an early start and all, the boys figured they'd make a little detour over towards Buster and Jesse's folks' place, where they're first settled there at Mount Sterling, Kentucky. Come to find out that Buster and Jesse had to be cousins. In them days, there just wasn't no way to get around except in horses and buggies and walking. Back in the hills, there weren't much of a place to go except right there, and folks just had to make do. So finding a husband or a wife had to be done right there with the folks at hand. So I reckon as fate has it, McBrayers and Tiptons were just bound to be married up in each other's family somehow or another. Now in them days, both sets of families were pretty well thought of. The Tiptons had a lawyer or two in the family, as well as 3 preachers and a senator down in Frankfort. Now the McBrayers had a distillery that made old McBrayer whiskey. Now some of the finest Kentucky straight bourbon there was, and it was even sent plumb over to England and other parts of the world. Now old Hugh Forbes founded the place way back in 1792. Now he was a Scottish feller, and that's how them McBrayers come to be there. They come from Scotland too and knowed the Forbes clan right well. Thing is, the Forbes people didn't stay long and died out young. The Tiptons had been there a sight longer since the 1600s. Well anyhow, Buster and Jesse had folks that was kin by marriage, and they was plumb tickled about it. Between the tobacco and the larpin' good whiskey, folks did right well in them parts, as there was jobs and hard cash to spend. Some folks took to a mining, and Buster's people worked the coal mines thereabouts too. The boys done pulled into a station there and was filling their tank and looking for a place to stay the night when Jesse and Walter sidled up to an old gentleman whittling on a piece of hickory. Well, hickory sure wouldn't be my first choice of wood to whittle on, being it's hard and all, but that old feller sure was a making chips fly. Must have had the sharpest dang knife in the county to do that. Well anyway, Walter could get a rock to talk to him, and he was just a-chatting away when all of a sudden he done hollered on over to the rest of the boys to come on over. He said, "You just got to listen to what this feller has to say." Well, that old man said he knew of both Jesse and Buster's people and said they had some kin about a mile on down the road. He was right proud to meet the boys and commenced to tie 'em up to the folks he knowed all his in life. They visited for a spell, quite a spell at that, and told all about their ma and pa and grandma and grandpa and everybody they could think of as far back as they knowed. Sure enough, the old man said that old maid and that grandniece of hers was direct kin to the boys. Said they ought to go on up for a visit and just say howdy if nothing else. Well, the boys said what the heck and drove on up to the turnoff at the lane to the house. Now it weren't no house, I tell you, it was a mansion. Now it was on the backside of the old distillery for that old McBrayer whiskey. Was a bit run down, but not by much, just needed a little TLC and a man's hand and things. But Jesse done jumped out to Ford and made a beeline to the door. He knocked on the door with a big old door knocker and tugged a mite on the pull rope for the door chime. And after a bit, a gal answered the door. Boy, she was pretty as a July goldenrod, and Walter and Hired's eyeballs like to have popped plumb out of their sockets and rolled back like window shades. She asked Jesse if she could help him, and Jesse stated her business about visiting some kin of theirs. She said, "I declare, Aunt Judith and I didn't know of any of our relations that were still living. Would y'all like to come in and speak to them?" Well, it sure didn't take long for an answer from them boys. I tell you, all of them piped up at once and told her they'd be right proud and appreciative to speak to her Aunt Judith. The gal invited them all into the parlor and asked them to wait till she announced them to her aunt, who was a-reading in the library. She said she was just finishing up her daily Bible study and would be right back. Just a few minutes later, the gal come back and faced the boys and introduced her aunt and asked if each of the boys would introduce themselves to her. Well, there was Jesse McBrayer, there was Buster, that was Russell Jr., Tipton, Walter Ollinger, and Hired Holmes. Now this was a real southern lady, I tell you, made the boys pull at their collar and be real respectful to this lady. Their ma's was real fine women, but just didn't have the schooling in highfalutin college like this lady did. That gal was just like her too. Come to find out, her name was Elizabeth Jane Barrett. But now get this, Aunt Judith was Judith Ann Tipton McBrayer. Now don't that just beat all? The boys like to drop their eye teeth over that one. Now Aunt Judith had a sister named Julie, and her daughter Mary married up with a Barrett boy and come to have Elizabeth Jane, their only child. They done passed while on a trip to the Orient. Some kind of bug from a mussel shell in the water done took them. Well, Aunt Judith asked the boys if they wanted a bite to eat, and you know them boys could eat a horse at any time, day or night. Now Miss Elizabeth Jane went on out and told some kitchen help to fix up some eats for the boys. Now those women folks that were helping them out had been with their families for years and years and was like family themselves. Anyhow, there was a meal fitting for a king. Them boys eat till they about popped. When the meal was done, Aunt Judith had 'em all to retire to the parlor and offered up some after-dinner drinks. Lo and behold, it was old McBrayer whiskey. You know'd it'd been long gone since the distillery been shut down for all them years, but sure enough, there it was, finest sipping whiskey ever to pass them boys' lips, that's for sure. Well, Aunt Judith started recollecting on how they was kin and was all a wonder about Jessie and Buster. She didn't know they was any of her kin left excepting Miss Elizabeth. Well, Hired Walter was underfoot with that gal every second they was there at the house, always asking if they could help her carry something or fix something. Every time she'd smile, they'd just about swoon. Even got to tussling a bit when she needed firewood chopped and carried to the stove in the kitchen, just trying to outdo the other and trying to impress Miss Elizabeth Jane for her favor. Well, here's how it was since Aunt Judith was a Tipton and a McBrayer, married up to a McBrayer. Her ma was a Tipton for sure, and she married up with a McBrayer. They come from the Stamper side. Well, Judith done had a great Uncle Archie, but he was supposed to have been killed on a riverboat gambling, but it seems that just ain't so. He probably got shot up and was nursed by that southern gal down in New Orleans till he was better. They was some pretty rough fellers in that day, and Archie didn't want no harm to come to his family, so he just stayed down there for a spell and healed up. Married up with that Cajun French gal, and she was the one he put so much stock in and had them 3 youngins. Now, they moved up to Alaska when he was hunting gold and back down the Missouri way for land, and finally ended up in Mississippi just outside of Memphis in the cotton trade. That and freight made the boy a fortune. Now, his 2 sons and gal went on to marry up, and they settled in Arkansas and Alabama. Now, Jesse McBrayer had a boy Jesse, and he had our Jesse Darrell. The girl, Sarah, married up with Russell, Buster's pa. The other, James, died in the big war over in France. Now, they figured out how it all come about. They was a crying and a hugging and was happy as a pig in sunshine to have found each other. The boy stayed on for a fortnight, that's 2 weeks, you know, and helped around the place and made all manner of repairs. Well, one day Aunt Judith called Jesse and Buster to the library for a chat. Miss Elizabeth Jane was there too. She told them she wanted to discuss something with them. She said she still made old McBrayer whiskey from the original recipe, and the old distillery was still in working order. She owned all the rights and the land around it, and the house and all the belongings too. She has some cash, but not so much, and she has some stock certificates her daddy left her. Seemed like he knowed the feller that invented things, and he helped a bit to get it all started, and the feller give him 20% of the stock. Now, that company was now called SAB, Southern African Breweries. It come out of Castle Breweries. Aunt Judith said she was getting on up in years, and she wanted Elizabeth Jane, Jesse, and Buster to have it all. Then she took them all out to the distillery and opened up the doors to reveal the equipment and kettles and bottling machines. They was dusty and unused, but she continued on to a secret panel that led to a limestone cave under the foundation. There was barrels of old McBrayer just for the asking. What a sight to see. Aunt Judith had all of them set on down, and she poured them all a jigger full and toasted her family that was now together. Aunt Judith then began to tell them all how it was to be. Told Jesse to look into them stock certificates to see what they was worth, and to check on what to do with the investing and cashing in the proceeds, but not to sell more than 40% of them. Buster was to look into the cranking the distillery up, and Elizabeth Jane was to look after the business side and the home place. Well, they all agreed to take care of each other, and the women had been with the family for so many years would always keep things the way they was unless they agreed to do different. Well, Jesse and Buster was a popping buttons right about then. They asked about their folks back home, and she said they could do as they pleased with their part, but it was for the young'uns of the bunch to carry on the names of McBrayer and Tipton and make both families proud. Now, Aunt Judith said she would consider it an honor if Jesse's pa, ma, and his sisters could come for a visit with Buster's grandpa Gus and Grandma Clara. All of Buster's people had all passed, and his and ma's folks was all that was left. Now, the boys had sense enough to know they couldn't do all this by themselves, so they would just leave well enough alone till all was in place like it ought to be. They'd take just enough to set things right with the old McBrayer distillery and care for body and soul. Elizabeth Jane said she would stay for a spell with Aunt Judith, and then she wanted to go back to Europe to finish up some studies she had been taking. She knowed this feller over there that was an awful fine feller and figured on seeing where that was going to be going. That like to have broke Walter and Hired's hearts, I tell you, when Jesse told them that. Them 3 done made up a pact to care for Aunt Judith till she passed on, and would be a-coming around so much that you couldn't throw the dishwater out the back door without hitting one of them in the head. Well, Buster got to wondering how Aunt Judith's pa even met up with that feller that give him the stock. His name, as she remembered, was Frederick Meade, and was just stopping over on his way back home to England to raise some money for a new brewery. Well, they got to talking, and her Pa Samuel give old Fred $500 in gold pieces to get her started. There's a heck of a lot of money back then, and in gold too. Turned out to be a real good investment, as they seed it. Well, Buster and Jesse done got Walter and hired and told them about all the goings on and doings. They said they wanted them to be in on it with them, and they all had a future bright and pure if they just played their cards right. Well, the boys was happy as pig and slop, and with a few bottles of Aunt Judith's Old McBrayer whiskey, they was in hog heaven. Well, after Sunday meeting at the First Christian Church on the place, they all ate a fine meal and told the ladies they was off in the morning. Well, Aunt Judith and Elizabeth Jane teared up some, but the boys all said they'd come back through after their trip and stay a spell while Elizabeth Jane went on back to Europe for a visit. Well, you'd think that was it for surprises, but it sure wasn't. Hired and Walter got 'em one. Well, Hired was chasing a bull snake down at the distillery when it run under a pile of rocks. Well, Hired couldn't get to it, so he went on inside of the building and was looking for a pry bar or something to move them rocks. He done found that old horseshoe on the side of the wall, a hole in the tater hole. He went to get that tater hole. He pulled down on that horseshoe, and danged if it didn't turn halfways and a trap door popped open. Well, in the meantime, Walter was off riding a gray, and he found out in the back pasture, and as a horse whisperer, he got that gray walking and talking for him. He was a darn good horse whisperer, and he done took some sugar cubes from the house and an apple off a tree in the yard and walked up to that horse real quiet-like and had him eating out of his hand in no time. No sooner than he began to talking to that horse, he up and jumped astraddle of him and was riding bareback and racing the wind. He was riding down by the creek when he heard the awfulest commotion. He looked up, and guess what he done seed? Hired come a-flying through the air and landed in the water right at that horse's feet. That gray reared up and throwed Walter right smack dab in the middle of the creek besides Hired. Well, old Hired come up a spitting and a spewing, but the water tweren't that deep, only it's about 5 foot or so. When that trap door popped open, old Hired dropped down a pipe and ended up in the creek. It was an old escape tunnel to the outside if Injuns or scoundrels come about with their skullduggery. Wet and grinning from ear to ear, them two boys was splitting their sides a laughing. Wetter than frog hair they was, and just plain amazed at all the doings they was a-seeing on this trip. Now, them two up and hiked on back to the house and dried off and told their story to everybody. Well, Aunt Judith didn't know nothing about that trap door, but got a laugh out of Hired and Walter that had her dabbing her eyes with her hanky. Well, the next morning the boys said their goodbyes, and after all the hugs, they headed on out. Headed out again. They kind of went northeast, and now they was going to head back towards the west. Northwest, that is. West, north? That old Ford of Buster's had a mind of its own, because the direction they was to be going seemed to get turned around every which way. Started west and ended up going east. Headed north, then northeast. But now they was finally going straight north. Gonna see some snow for sure. Them boys never did see snow. That was piled up high, you know. They drove a fur piece for the next couple of days and finally come to a stopping point at the Canadian border and then turned back towards the west. Now, they took turns of driving, but Walter drove too slow, so Buster took over the driving chores again and had to open her up a bit. Now, Jesse had to stop and gom around a bit, every little thing and place and was to see, and every hole in the wall, like Davy Crockett's Tavern and all them little towns that sported some kind of museum. The boys joined up in parades and rubber duck races on the river and a pie-eating contest at the county fair. Now, Walter had to show his hand at riding and roping at a little rodeo somebody put on outside a place in Wyoming. Hired done brung his motorcycle with him and raced at the Pikes Peak Mountain Track. Come in second there, too. Well, after making their way and having a ball doing it, they come the back way into the border of Idaho. Now, that old Ford was a good one and had four-wheel drive and not nary a ball tire. Well, Jesse and Hired was gawking at something or the other when they found a back road near the border. Reckon it was less than 20 miles from Canada by that time. Well, them two boys just had to take that trail, and so Buster turned up the trail there and made his way as far as he could. So far, in fact, he couldn't turn around. Well, the boys got out and started exploring a bit before dark. As I said, they had plenty of victuals and camping gear with them, plus shotgun and rifles. Right at dusk, danged if and Hired didn't go chasing some kind of critter he ain't never seen before. It come to a rock in the side of the mountain there. Now, whatever that critter was, he done right run right on into that mountain. And Hire done hollered for the boys to come and see if they can help him figure out how that critter done that. Well, they got to look at it come on to dark when Walter and Jesse found a crack in the face of the mountain that was covered over by some bushes. All of them got to pulling back that brush and found it to be movable like. A door of some kind that led into the mountain itself. Even though there was a full moon and bright starlight on a clear night, they decided to wait for morning to do more investigating. They cooked up some beans and taters with slab bacon and bologna on the side for supper and made up their bed in a big tent they brung with them. Whilst they was sitting around the campfire, Walter asked Buster to tell him the whole story about Ish was referring to when Buster went up to there to visit him. Well, Buster said it was the nicest time for sure. He said he heard tell of some of the rough places up in them hills and didn't figure he ever wanted to go there and told Ish so. Well, Ish told Buster they wasn't going to go no place like that, but he was taking him out that night for a mite of fun and pure lip-licking good white lightning. Well, it sounded good to Buster. Where we headed to, Ish, he said. Well, reckon we can run out to the club across the mountain. There's a gal over there I want to see. Okay, said Buster. What's the name of the place? Well, the Pink Puppy, quipped Ish. You're going to have some fun for sure, Buster. Well, sir, as they was driving over to the place, Buster seen something alongside the road. Buster hollered for Ish to back on up so he could see what it was. Well, it was a feller trying to get up the ditch bank. When Buster and Ish got to where they could get on out where the feller was, he up and clumb out of that ditch. Well, Buster asked the feller if he was all right and could he help him. Well, the feller was beating his chest with both hands and crossed his arms like he was swatting flies. Well, Buster asked the feller what was the matter with his himself, and he said nothing. He was lost and just trying to find his himself. Now, if that didn't take the cake, said Buster to Ish, that feller was drunker than a Cooter Brown and a skunk too, I tell you. All true, folks. Well, the feller just ambled on off down the road, and they drove on to the club. When they got there, Buster hollered, "Oh no, this here's the Red Dog Saloon. It's sure enough the roughest place in the county. We ain't a-going in there, are we?" Ish, don't fret none, 'cause he knowed everybody there, and long as he knowed them, he was with him, it would be all right. Now, he's trying to placate old Buster now. Well, as they was getting out the car, a feller come a-flying out the door and landed on the hood of a car parked out there. Now, it was about 4 feet to the top of the porch, and the feller took screen door and all when he come flying over him. Well, Ish grabbed Buster's arm, pulled him up the steps and into the club. Everybody in the club turned around and looked at him when they walked in. Now, Ish told them all that this here is my very own first cousin from Arkansas, and he's meaner than me and Paul, that's his brother, put together, so you better leave him be. Well, then they went on back to what they was a-doing. Well, Ish had Buster sit on down at a table and said he'd be right back and headed to the bar. Ish was back before Buster knowed it with a couple of drinks. Then said, "Enjoy yourself, I got some things to tend to." Well, Buster wasn't sitting there enjoying his drink when a woman sat down beside him. She told him to buy her a drink, and Buster said, well, he didn't mind that at all, but he didn't want no trouble. She said there wouldn't be none. Buster went up to the bar and asked for a bourbon and coke. "Well, ain't none," said the bartender. "Bourbon and 7? Nope. Bourbon and Branch? Just Moon. You furnish your own fixings." "I ain't got none," says Buster. Well, the bartender pointed to a coke machine there in the corner. Well, Buster got the drinks and brung them back to the table. Him and the gal was talking when this feller come up and was giving her what for. The feller looked at Buster a-fuming, and Buster said he didn't want no trouble. The gal then told the feller to get on out of there, and he left all dither-ready like. Buster asked the gal just who that was. She said that was her boyfriend. Well, Buster told her he just didn't want no trouble, and she said, well, there wouldn't be none. They had another drink, and then another feller just come up, fried. He started in on that gal, and she set him to sail. Well, Buster said to her again, who was that? She said her ex-husband. Well, Buster told her again that he didn't want no trouble, and she said it'd be okay. Well, after a bit, about 2 more drinks, this feller come up breathing fire and just a-getting on that gal and turned on Buster. Well, now, Buster just about had all he wanted of it. He told the fella that he'd just sit down and waiting on his cousin, and the gal plopped down beside him and asked him for a drink, so he got her one. The feller turned on the gal, and they began to fussing and a-cussing, something terrible like that. Finally, the gal run him off, him just a-spitting fire. Well, Buster up and asked the gal just who in the dickens that was. She said that was her husband. Well, that done it for Buster. He got it from there and let it shut to find Ish. He done found him over by the far tables with a gal. About that time, all manner of hell was breaking loose. Reckon all them fellers was a-fighting mad over that gal and went to throwing bottles and cans at each other and everybody else too. Even the jukebox was a target. Reckon that's why it was all covered up in the chicken wire. Well, Buster got Ish and got out of there whilst the getting was good. When they hit the highway, the police was a-waiting and lit out after him. Well, Ish knowed every trick in the book, every road too. Them police never did catch him and never would catch him. He knew that from running liquor all over the county. Well, that sure enough was enough excitement tonight for Buster, said Buster to Ish. Ish says to Buster, why don't we run into Knoxville and see some gals that I know? Buster told him he ain't gonna go. He just didn't have on his fighting clothes. He didn't need no more surprises. Well, there you have it, boys. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Well, morning come early, so they turned in for the night. Well, it just wasn't due for Hired not to know what was in that hole in the mountain. So he took up his kerosene lantern and went on into the hole to take a peek. Now, his curiosity just got the better of him like a cat. Well, after a bit, old Hired ain't come back to bed, and Buster had to find the bushes for some relief, and there was no Hired to be found. He woke up Walter and Jesse and went to asking if they knowed where he done went. Of course, they said no, and all of them put on their boots and breeches and went to searching for Hired. Well, right off, they figured, knowing him as they did, to look at that there hole in the mountain. Sure enough, the bushes were pulled back, and there inside a few feet was Hired's lantern. Well, they knowed this couldn't be good. So they went on back to camp and geared up with their lights and shotgun and rifles, and Walter done brought his and snake pistol, and Buster had his and automatic. Well, Jesse didn't have no pistol, but Buster told him not to worry none, because he got him one from old Charlie Snyder before leaving on the trip. Said you never knowed when you might need one. 'Tweren't no hog leg, but one of them little automatics the Polacks used for the police over there in their country. Charlie says he come by it honest and let Buster have it for a steal. But Charlie knowed all the boys, and they would do to ride the river with. They took off to find Hired. Going into the hole was a bit tight, but it opened up right smart about 30 yards in. You could tell critters had been in and out, bedding up in there too. Must have been right interesting to Hired. Anyhow, they was worried about Hired since his lantern was left right inside that hole, and there tweren't no sign of hiding a hair of him neither. They kept walking further and further in the mountain and finally come to a crevice with a wood swinging bridge across it. Well, Jesse went on over first and said it was safe to come on over. Walter went next, and then Buster, and there was no mishaps. After scrunching up a bit, Walter and Buster was getting a little tight, and things getting to be a bit testy. Tighter than Dick's hat band in there, I tell you. It got so you couldn't even turn around. Well, Jesse made it on through a fat man's squeeze, and Walter sucked in and I guess found himself another coat of grease because he got on through too. Scun up in a few places, but he made it. But Buster was in a pickle. Between the four of them boys, Buster and Walter couldn't take no closed up places because they'd come out of there like a dose of sauce to a mad winter woman one way or another. Well, Buster was a pretty tough cuss, but getting stuck between them rocks weren't no laughing matter. He went to a bellering like a bull and a squealing like a hog stuck under a gate. Hollered to Walter and Jesse to get him a loose from there. There just wasn't there a thing they could do, seeing how they couldn't go back with Buster blocking the way. Well, Walter and Jesse said they'd go on up ahead and scout out the place, but Buster wasn't going to have none of it. Told them that one of them had to stay with him. Being as how Jesse was the skinniest, he said he'd go ahead and Walter stay with Buster. Now, Buster told Walter he was plumb scared of being stuck, and Walter said he sure enough was a feeling for him and he'd stay with him till the hell rolled over. Well, Jesse left on out and went out of sight, but Walter had both his and Buster's lanterns, so they had light. He give Buster a drink out of his canteen, because Buster was might frightful. Would have give him some of that old McBrayer, but they left it at the campsite. In the meantime, Hired done got his himself hog-tied. Jesse come up on him and said, "What in the world is going on here?" Well, before you knowed it, Jesse got lassoed too. Then this spook come out of nowhere, just a bellering and a whooping and a prancing about with all manner of gyrations. Then about that time, the lights went out in Georgia, as they say. The candle went out and a tow sack was put over Jesse's head like Hired's. Well, after a bit, there was some light, and there laid Walter and Buster, trussed up like Jesse and Hired. Now, how that come to be, Jesse didn't have a clue. Wasn't long before they found out, though. This demon come back a ranting and a raving and pert near said for gospel that he'd have 'em for breakfast. Boys thought they was into some of them cannibals or something. Them fellers that won't eat on you. What a fix. Well, I told you Walter could get a rock to talk to him. Wasn't long that there demon took off them toe sacks off their hides and took that outfit and mask off. Come to find out, he was called by the locals the monster of Talus Rock. Ain't nobody ever found his lair before, and it was a certain quizzical to him how they done it. Well, Walter told him who they all was and how they come to be there and how Hired had away with critters and all. Well, that feller tested Hired's metal right then and there. He untied old Hired and told him to stand stock still. The monster man whistled and a wolf run in. He told Hired to make his acquaintance. Said that wolf ain't never cottoned to no man excepting him. Well, old Hired got down on all fours and began to sniffing. That wolf bared his teeth and hackles went up. Hired just rolled over like, pulled up his arms and legs straight in the air. That old wolf come over to him and sniffed and jumped atop of Hired and let out a howl. About that time, old Hired nuzzled that wolf and licked him, began to pet him and talk soft like to him too. It wasn't long before he got up and that wolf laid down right beside him. Well, that monster man told Hired if that don't beat all, he'd see that wolf tear many a critter and man or two to bits and never think nothing about it. Well, monster man told him he was Jim Rogers by way of Nova Scotia and come to be here prospecting for gold. Didn't have no people to speak of, and what he was a-telling no other man knowed. You just got to understand that them four boys was plumb believable and honest to the core, so no lying to them four. I reckon old Jim took stock of the boys and couldn't do nothing else less than he left them for dead. One question they had was how in the dickens did he get Buster out of that tight spot he was in? Well, he said he first got Walter gagged and trussed up when he went round Bend to see to nature. Then he jumped up on Buster and he done put a toe sack over his name. Said he was a big un and had a devil of a time getting him loose. He had a block and tackle in the roof there and heated up a bucket of bear grease and poured it all over Buster. Then he lifted him right on out of there. Said there was a hidden tunnel where you wouldn't get stuck on the right. And Buster did smell to high heaven, and they kept their distance till they got him cleaned up. Well, finally all of them settled in, and all of them got cleaned up. Then they began to visit with Jim. Well, Jim had a right nice place inside of the mountain. Plenty of water and sunlight coming through a natural vent in the roof. Little lake down the bottom of the cave. Guess it was more like an underground river feeding it, with the overflow continuing on down through the mountain. He was as snug as a bug in a rug. Jim said it never got too cold or too hot in there, and there was plenty of game and fish round about. He had plenty of stores put up for quite a spell. Well, they told Jim where they was from and all about their folks and people and their trip. Well, Jim said he sure enough would like a taste of that old McBrayer and would trade for it. Well, Buster told him his money was no good, and if he would show him the way out, he would get them some, or they could all go. Well, Jim whistled to the wolf, and he didn't come. Told Hired he done plumb spoilt that wolf. Well, they all left and went on back to camp. They set about cooking up a fine meal of victuals and telling their wandering. Jim said he struck it rich in that mountain, and he done had a partner that tried to steal all the gold they mined. He took off one night with more than he could carry. He was a greedy sort to the bone. Well, Jim sicked the wolf on him, and when he come to his partner, that old wolf had him treed, cornered really. His partner tried to jump across the chasm with the gold and didn't make it. Fell to his death 1,000 feet down, 1,000 foot down. Well, after that, all manner of folks come looking for gold, but Jim got ID to run them off, which he did as the monster man. And one or two others got killed searching for that gold, and the legend of Talus Rock was born. Well, after visiting till late, they all turned in and got some well-deserved sleep. The next day, Jim showed the boys all the wonders of the mountains. The most majestic vistas that good Lord ever created. Beautiful, deep, ice-cold lakes, games and fish everywhere, and a sky so blue it reached to heaven. Forest emerald green in spring and a patchwork of colors in fall. But the nights was the most spectacular. The northern lights were truly a magnificent sight to behold. Jim showed the boys his strike. It was a rainbow of gold inside that mountain. Said if he ever kicked the bucket, he wanted the boys to have it, but would leave instructions on what to do with a portion of it. Well, Hired had to take care of the wolf, though, and didn't want him to pine himself to death, and he wanted his place here kept a secret. He knew well what greed would do to a feller. That afternoon, the boys got the Ford turned around after a bit of finagling and packed it up to leave. Jim come down and was saying his goodbyes when Jesse and Buster brung out a couple of jugs of old McBrayer. They give 'em to Jim, and Jim teared up right there. He said he'd wished he'd had sons like them boys, and he'd miss 'em. He said he hoped they'd come back real soon. Well, Buster said if he'd heard his peacock call at the bottom of the mountain, he'd know it was them. Jim said he dearly appreciated these here 4 jugs of old McBrayer. Back in his day, when they was still around, it was his favorite right liquor. Well, they all looked at each other, and Walter and Hired were just a-grinning. They done slipped old Jim a bottle apiece themselves. They all was a-laughing when they decided to stay till morning and get an early start. Jim said him and the wolf would be back down in the morning to see him off. Well, they all hit the hay feeling pretty darn good with their maker in the world. Next morning they woke up with a noise like a bull in a china closet. When they opened up the tent flap, there was a full-grown moose staring them in the face. They like to have fell out right then and there. You just don't know how big a moose is till you come face to face with one. Well, guess what? Hired was out there petting the little one, and 'tweren't nothing going on except the ma would look back on the baby and Hired every now and again. Now they spoke real soft like and told Hired to get that moose loose so they could come on out. Oh, he says she ain't going to bother you. Well, they told him they didn't care just to get her away from the tent. Danged if Hired didn't walk over to the ma and give her something to eat. Don't rightly know what Hired done give her, but she nuzzled him and just walked on off with her baby. Well, after what packing there was to be done and was put away, Jim come up. They all shook hands and said so long that they would be in touch. Well, Jesse give Jim a paper with all their home information on it in case he needed to get in touch with them or needed anything. The boys got him some fresh water out the stream and got on in the fort. Jim waved goodbye and went on back to his mountain with the wolf. Buster put it on the road and headed due west. Got out of Denver and stopped for a bit of a rest to fill up with gas. When they got in the back to move some things around, Walter done found that each of their packs was a mite heavy to move. He hollered to the boys and asked them, was they a packing rocks or something? They said heck no, and come back there and opened each of the packs. Their eyes got bigger than saucers. They each had a doe-skin pouch of gold nuggets in their pack. Jim done come down early and put them sacks of gold in each one of the packs. They bet he got a chuckle from hiring and petting and feeding that moose. The boys said they made a friend for life, and they made up a pact to get back as soon as they could and see Jim as a friend for life. Seems like this trip is in the makings for another. Due west it is. Adventure and memories are coming. Westward ho. West, finally. They was well on their way when Walter told them all not to get in too far into the old McBrayer jug because he knowed what could happen to a bunch of fellers. He said he was out with a bunch of the Britton boys there. There was about 20 of them and all kin, but with most brothers, and the police done pulled them over. They was down in Turkey, Texas, down by Greenbelt Lake, where an annual motorcycle rally was held every year. Well, now when the officer pulled them over, one of the Britton boys pulled on the officer's handcuffs and kind of made like him to stumble getting out the car. Thought it was real funny like. Now he was fit to be tied and hauled them all into the jail. Well, since they made a right smart amount of money with arresting the motorcycle riders in town every year, the jails weren't big enough to hold all the boys they arrested. So they used the gymnasium at the schoolhouse for a temporary jailhouse. Used plastic cuffs and set them all down every which place. Walter done found out if you pled guilty, the judge would let you go if you emptied all your pockets and your billfold and whatever amount you had was your fine. Well, old Elmer Britton was drunker than a skunk, Cooter Brown to boot, got before the judge and said he was not guilty. Walter and the boys see they was taking Elmer off to the big house and hollered for him to plead guilty. Elmer went to hollering, guilty, guilty, guilty of sin, judge, guilty. Well, the officer turned Ike around, and the officer turned around to the judge, and Elmer gave the judge all he had. Now, Manley was just about 3 sheets to the wind, and they done give him the breath test. He did not pass, I tell you. This was going to be the ruination of Manley because he was schooling to be a pharmacist. There was a Texas State Trooper there from their hometown of Groom that knowed all the boys, and he told the judge he needed to test Manley again as there was something that went wrong with the first time test. Well, he tested Manley and he come back in and told the judge he was okay, and they let him go too. Well, Manley sure enough owed that trooper for letting him off and letting him get to making a life as a pharmacist because he couldn't have got to pharmacy school with a drinking fine on his record. Well, anyhow, Walter said when it come to him emptying his pockets of billfold, he only had 58 cents on his person. Cheapest fine he ever got, he said. I declare that boy could wiggle out his way anything. Told you he had sweet talking ways. Just ask Lou Ann next time you see her. They told him they didn't have no problem with the store or two, but none of them was into liquor real heavy, and they'd be sightful careful on the trip. They'd just let them get on down the road. Map reading weren't no calling for none of the boys, but if any one of them wanted to stop and take a look-see, they could, and they did. Most times it was Jesse that wanted to stop and look at something, though, and Walter would chime right in. They was all having fun enjoying their trip, so to stop here and there wasn't nothing to any of them. So when Jesse and Walter piped up and wanted to go to that there snow mountain where they was a skiing, wasn't nothing to do but to go there unless they had a hissy fit. When they got to the place where you could get to go up the mountain, Buster told him he was just going to sit for a spell and enjoy the scenery. To tell the truth, he done seed where and how they'd have to get to the top of that there mountain, and he wasn't going to have no part in it. He didn't cotton to the heights neither. Well, Hire done found where to ride one of them snowmobiles and told the feller he wanted the fastest one he had. Walter and Jesse thought it'd be something to try too, so they said they wanted to rent one, but didn't have to be no faster. Those boys just didn't know what they done let theirselves in for. I tell you, Buster seed it all a coming. Not none of him, he said to himself. The boys had to ride this confounded contraption to the top of the mountain. The feller renting it said. Now, Jesse was plumb skittish about heights too, but since he was riding with Walter as big as he is, he figured it'd be okay. Of course, Hire couldn't wait and took on off to the top on his own. Well, this contraption to sit on come up behind Walter and Jesse, and Walter just plunked old Jesse in the seat with him hanging on for dear life. Well, Hire was already at the top of watching all the goings on and wondering what all the fuss was all about. He done rode that mountain in places steep and double back on you. Well, Hire let that machine fly, don't you know, just as you thought he'd crash and burn and have that thing come back on him, he'd fling himself and that machine over the lip of that mountain just to kicking up snow. Well, Hire could really ride, I tell you. He was a thing of pure beauty to see how Hire could handle a machine, any kind of machine, be it motorcycle or four-wheeler or snowmobile or jet ski or any kind of heavy equipment. He'd take off up a hill straight down and sliding with the excavator and never think nothing about it. Been doing it since he was a pup. Well, that thing cranked right on up the mountain, and when old Jesse looked down, he pretty near fainted. Walter was just having himself a ball and didn't pay no mind to Jesse. Well, after a hair-raising ride, according to Jesse, they come to the top. Walter done lifted up this here bar that holds you in, and old Jesse about had a heart attack. He done grabbed his chest and balled up Walter looking as green as a gourd. Now that contraption just didn't stop. It kept on going, so Walter had to grab a hold of Jesse and pull him off and away from that front of that thing. Well, Jesse was limp as a dish rag by then and couldn't even catch his breath, let alone talk. Well, Hire run up to see if he could help and told him too it was about the funniest thing he'd seen in quite a spell. Well, Walter just looked at him and grinned, but Jesse wasn't in no mood for funning, I'm here to tell you. Well, after Jesse got his bearings and all, the feller that rented them machines come up and says to saddle up for the ride. He gave the boys instructions on how to operate the machines, but Hire done figured it all out. Well, all of them took on off, and after a bit, everybody got used to riding the machines and was having a high old time. The snow was elbow deep to a tall engine, and it was colder than that there well digger you was always hearing about. Talk about a view, it was picture perfect, and the air was clean and crisp and right fresh. They was all doing fine till Jesse come a little close to the edge once or twice, but he hung in there as long as he wasn't looking down. Finally, they come towards the end of the ride, and the feller guiding them said they was going to have to ride that contraption back down the mountain. Now, Jesse says just wasn't going to have none of that. That's for sure. Well, guess he got his and wish, because the feller said the contraption done broke and they had to ride the machines back down. Well, first time that ever happened that he knowed of, he said. They all mounted back up and rode on down for a piece till the feller told them that was where they'd have to go down. Well, Jesse done took one look and said, "No way am I going to go down out there hill and nobody can make me." Well, the guide feller says to Jesse to hop on the back of his'n and he'd take him on down. Walter and Jesse was a sitting side by side looking down that hill and knowed it was going to be one heck of a thrilling ride. If they wasn't killed or hurt bad. Well, Jesse up and says he was going to do it, and the feller says to follow in his'n tracks. Well, that jump off right from the start sure enough took your breath away, they told later. There wasn't no stopping once you lit out for the bottom. Well, Jesse's machine was a sliding and a twisting and a turning, and once he got it figured out how to track that thing, it weren't too bad. Well, all of them got back safe and sound, and Buster had him a ringside seat and seated all. Come to find out, that hill was called a 4 Black Diamond Hill for the most experienced skiers. Ain't no snowmobile supposed to go down it at all. Well, when they got off and put up their gear, that guide feller told Jesse that was one fine piece of riding he done, and he ain't never seen no better, experienced rider or not. Well, old Jesse was proud as punch and a peacock, and a grin as wide as the Grand Canyon was spread across his face. They had his picture took to show all the folk back home, 'cause they wouldn't believe it none. Well, Buster took all of them into the restaurant there and bought them some good grub and eats and really good hot chocolate. After that, it was getting on to dark, so the boys loaded up and found the town Sandpoint and looked for a place to bed down for the night. They was a driving around and see the sign for a boarding house. As tired as they was, decided to spend a little more hard cash for a good bed and breakfast victuals. When they got to the lane at Peterson's boarding house, they parked the Ford close by, as the boys was might stove up after all that riding and coming down that hell bent for Leather Hill. Well, Buster knocked up on the door, and it was answered by a real pretty lady. She had the biggest and warmest smile you ever did see, and invited the boys on in. Told them she had plenty of room and give them all their own bedsteads for the night. But Jesse got himself a place off to a side, like a little apartment-like affair. Walter and Hired got the bottom floor that was as big as a house of its own, and Buster got a master room at ground level, seeing as he was the biggest and needed a sturdy bed frame to hold him up. 'Twarn't no corn husk in them mattresses, nor ropes for springs neither. Felt like he was on a cloud in them there feather beds. Well, the boys slept in the next morning, and breakfast was waiting for them when they got up. The lady of the house was Miss Peterson, and told them all to call her Heather, but the boys couldn't rightly do that, as she was a married-up woman and mother of 3 youngins. Now, her husband was a vet, and Hired stuck to him like glue. And Mr. Peterson took a shine to Hired right quick, too. There was another woman staying there, and she was quite fetching herself as she sidled up to Jesse and batted those big old brown eyes at him the whole time they was there. "It's them pheromones of yourn, Jesse," said Buster. "Lots to be said for an older woman," they told Jesse, but he said not be funning him none about all that. But she and Mae West could have been sisters, the way they was built. Well, anyhow, Walter got on out to the stables and checked out the horses and other stock and visited Mr. Peterson too. Buster said a good spell and talked to Miss Peterson about every which thing. Told him all about the town and folks and what all was happening there. That lady sure was a beautiful woman, but it was her personality that really made her beauty. Great inside and out. Figured Mr. Peterson was a lucky man at that. She was American all right, but was half Indian. That's East Indian, over in India. Not the kind was here in the USA, but the foreign kind from India. Told Buster a lots about that place too. Now, their youngins was smart as a whip, and that little gal of theirs was a spitting image of her ma, with helping folks in foreign lands and folks around there too. They had a right nice place, and the food was real good too. Well, Buster ate everything she put in front of him and sopped up his gravy with homemade biscuits and got fuller than a goose in a corn grill. Well, Buster had him a shock or two with all manner of critters in the house. Whilst Buster was fixing to eat a bite, this dang goat jumped up on a chair beside him, butted him a little, and was ready to be fed. Dangest thing he ever saw. That goat was just like a member of the family. Whenever that goat got cold, he'd hunker up close to the fire to get warm. Trouble was, he'd catch his eye at a fire when he got too close, and he never even knowed it. You had to watch out for his fur burning and put him out. Dumber than 2 rocks, that goat was, but kind of likable cute though. You know how hair smells when it's burnt? Well, that goat smelled that way too. You could see him wandering around the place smoking. Now, if you didn't douse the thing, I guess you'd have had barbecue goat for supper. Guess it was to be expected to find all them critters round about, since Mr. Peterson was a vet. Well, the boys stayed over for a couple of days, and all of them at the house went out to this here restaurant that was supposed to be one of the best. Well, it sure enough was, and Jesse took a liking to their dressing for the salad and wanted to buy the place because they wouldn't give him the recipe for it. He swore he'd be back if for nothing else but the dressing. Of course, they teased him about that older woman staying at the house and asked him if he'd made up to seeing her again. They know Jesse's pheromones done got her the way she was acting around Jesse. He just told them they was plumb addled while they just laughed herself silly. Well, come morning, they decided to take off again, but before they did, they got introduced to a feller named John that knowed Mr. Peterson for years back in Pennsylvania where he come from. Now, Walter found this feller quite amazing and real interesting like. John was his name for sure. John told him that he could project himself to different places and whatnot and could find lost things too. Said he done got to project himself and ride in a spaceship with the spacemen. Whew, that was a hot lot to handle. Him and the engines was real friendly, and he said they shared many a secret with him. Also said the government liked what he could do too. He was writ up in the newspaper and was on the TV and radio a few times. Funny thing was, he was real believable, where such tall tales would normally have put him in a loony bin. Now, old Walter listened to every word the man said. Buster liked John too, and John told him a bunch of home remedies to cure all kinds of ailments. Nowadays they say organic, because there ain't no chemicals on the food, but the boys never know nothing except manure and fertilize. John was quite the feller, I'd say, and to make it even better to believe his yarns, Mr. Peterson vouchsafed for John. As their folks taught him, never judge a book by its cover. They left there with some more new friends, and they liked that place real well. Too bad they couldn't live all the places they been. John told them about a feller to meet up with on the way back south. Said he was thought to be a mad scientist, but they would find him real interesting like. Walter done put his foot down and said they was going to stop and see him there at his place for sure. Reckon they didn't have nary choice then. Of course, all the boys was up for anything, and they hated on out to find this feller named George. Buster drove up and down the roads many times about needing a new set of tires. The directions to find George was a mite sketchy to say the least. They had come to where the road stopped all the way to the Canadian border. Finally, with a little scouting and backtracking, they found the place. It had all manner of junk in the yard, including wrecked cars, shipping containers, outhouses, ramshackle old buildings, a bulldozer, and other various and sundry equipment. Just a mess, and the boys knowed their folks wouldn't allow none of that back home. Right pretty country up there, and to spoil the view and take no pride in your land and belongings didn't sit well with the boys. Well, anyhow, John said the feller was different. Don't judge unless you want to be judged, as the good book says. Well, the boys all piled out of the Ford and knocked up on the door. Lady answered, and they stated their business, and she told them to come on in but take off in their shoes. Well, don't rightly have seen how it would have made him much difference, since the log house was a mess too. Well, George sent word he'd be down in a bit just to have a seat. The boys done just that. Sitting on a stump would have been a heck of a lot more comfortable than the chairs those folks had, not to mention that there couch. Young'uns come a-running and a-jabbering, and they was cute little, as a little button too. Now, as the boys was sitting and waiting, Hire done seen a rat run by. One of the little boys said that he was his pet and friend. The hole in the wall let the critter come and go as he pleased, and that little feller got that rat that was as wild as could be, but doing tricks. Now, they had birds of all kinds in cages, and they didn't know what all else. Hired went a-looking around with two of the boys and was a-taking it all in. Quite entertaining them young'uns was, and smart as a tack too. The little girl says to Walter, Daddy is a-taking a bath, the first one he's had in a month. Well, when George come in, you could tell he was sure freshly scrubbed. His wife told the boys all he did was his doctoring and laboratory work. He experimented on everything, she said, even with them, and she said he done cured her of some sort of disease, and none of the young'uns been sick a day in their life. Well, one of the boys was over by an old rusted up refrigerator, and Buster figured it was for storage, but did he ever get a surprise? 'Tweren't no electric power hooked up to it, but it was a-running to beat the band. And Buster said, don't that beat all? There was a little round disc stuck on the side the boy said made it work. Well, George come in and sat right down with not so much as a how you do. Guess his wife told him John sent us, 'cause it was like they knowed the man all their lives. He talked about everything without missing a beat for 5 hours straight with not a word got in edgewise. He got to testing the boys' blood and showing them all manner of gadgets and doodads that was truly mind-boggling. he got to telling about how them spaceships and spacemen like John did, and says to step on outside and let me show y'all something. He done pointed up in the sky and said, there goes one, and sure enough something went a-whizzing by. Said he'd have to leave after a while, go up on this rock and visit with them a spell. Well, George showed the boys some symbols, and whilst on their trip they ought to stop by and visit some Indians he knowed and see the same symbols there too. Told them to see an Indian named Julian. Boy, this was getting a mite deep and real interesting to Walter and Hired. Jesse and Buster was taking it all in with a grain of salt, but there was some proof in the pudding, they reckoned. Well, after visiting for a spell, George got up as the boys was a-leaving, and up and gives them each a jar of some kind of powder. He said this stuff would cure up about anything, but use it wisely. Told them how to mix it, and that it would clean them out real good at first, and then they would start to feeling just fine. The boys thanked him for the kindness, and he invited them back when they was back in that way. This was a very smart feller, and he didn't pay much attention to nothing but his and work, and that's why things was left undone around his place. He treated folks in them parts with doctrine and giving them doodads he invented that couldn't be got nowhere else and for free. The boys recollected don't be judging. They was taught well. The boys let on out of there even though it was past midnight and put some miles behind them. After all they done and seed and heard, they all agreed to turn south for home. They drove for a piece and found them a little motel that was clean, and the lady there was real nice, and her husband had just passed, so she hadn't been open for long. They hit the sack with their heads a spinning with all they done been exposed to the past few days. But this trip was once in a lifetime. Lights out. One of them was already a-snoring and might have known it was a toss-up who was the loudest, Buster or Walter. South! Gosh a Friday, ain't that ocean some kind of pretty, exclaimed Walter. He done took off his cowboy boots and was swishing his feet in the water. Hired had to get a taste of it so he could say what it was like. Buster took the swimming right off and had his himself some gargles to see under the water. Well, Hired was about to have a fit to see too, so Buster let him have a look-see. But Jesse was a-walking and a-picking up shells and a-listening to the sound of the sea and the shell. The sky didn't have nary a cloud in it, and the boys was relaxing and enjoying life. They set for a spell in the shade and begun to rehashing what all they done in seed. There was Space Needle, and that was sure something, and them buffler had Hired chomping at the bits to learn more about them, and Walter wanted to lasso one since that feller said it just couldn't be done. And Buster wanted to jump in that Great Salt Lake and see how it felt to float in it, and Jesse had set his sights to break the bank in Reno, cause he figured a way to beat that there blackjack game. Well, they done eat all kind of grub and dearly loved them lobsters. Italian food was tops too. The dim sum that the Chinaman served them was gooder than stuff, and the desserts in that French bakery would make your tongue water something fierce. Slapped your tonsils. The boys done decided to turn back a bit east by southeast and see them Injuns George told them about. The Injun Julian was on a reservation on the Utah-Colorado border, and it wasn't that far away. They figured they'd camp out for a day or two and then head straight south. Getting there was quite the trick, for there was mule deer by the hundreds lining the roadway for miles. Had to be right careful or you'd run into one of them. Well, Buster stopped at Gander Mountain and got some deer screechers to scare the deer away when you got past 30 miles an hour. Reckon they worked right well, seeing how they didn't hit none. The boys pulled into that fancy resort town of Park City, Utah, and got a bite to eat and bought some more souvenirs for their folks and friends. Walter talked to some local fellers, and they told him they was about 2 or 3 hours out of where they wanted to go. Well, Buster hated on out US 40 and kept a munching his and buffalo burger. His lips smacking had the boys that was trying to nap thumping his and hay to hush up. Well, when they come into Heber City, Buster had to have a piece of pie and stopped in at the Hub. He done seed the biggest darn cinnamon roll ever, and had to have one of them too. No wonder he was bigger than a bear. They began to move on up into the mountains, and it got a sight colder, and snow was a-flying, but not too bad. They made their way out to a place by La Pointe called Shirley's. Stopped there and got some directions. They was only about 12, 14 miles from where that Injun Julian was supposed to be, and so they stocked up on a few victuals and filled the tank with gas. Well, getting on toward evening, the boys that found a turnoff and crossed Mosby Creek and four-wheel drive. Got kind of sandy on up toward the top of the mountain. Then at the top it leveled out some, and there was a nice camping spot with plenty of firewood. The boys pitched their tent and got them a good fire burning, fixed up a right good supper. That old Dutch oven wasn't to be beat excepting with Jesse's garbage can cooking. Said if and hired a Walter would shoot him a grouse or a turkey, he'd cook it up. The boys had had Jesse's turkey before and knowed how good it was. They made up a peach cobbler in a Dutch oven after supper and had campfire coffee with it. Well, after all of them settled in, Jesse got his fiddle out, and Walter played his and Juice Heart for some entertainment. Howard got out a jug of Old McBrayer for a little taste before bed. The boys had all a water glass full of branch. The water was from a stream coming out the mountain, and it was sweet and ice cold. About that time, a couple of fellers come by saying they'd seen the campfire. Josh and Jeff was their names, and they was local boys that had been hunting over the mountain. They had all kind of tales, and Josh says to the boys that old Bigfoot was round about there. Well, that got their attention, I tell you. Josh done took some pictures of the thing and said he sit and watched Bigfoot for about 2 hours one time. Said he just looked at him and he settled in on his haunches and watched 2 eagles playing on the ground. Well, Josh said he'd seen more than one of them too. One was about 15 foot tall and could run up and down them mountains lickety-split. The others was little as about 6 to 8 foot tall. Well, Jeff done vouched for the story and said their people settled this land and will tell you the same thing. Now, that ain't the half of it. They got to telling about skinwalkers and spaceships and such. Said they showed the boys some symbols on the cliff in the morning if they were still there. Walter done piped up and said it ain't nothing going to scare him off. Buster and Jeff and Josh, Buster told Jeff and Josh they wanted to find this here Injun Julian to get some information from him. Excuse me. Well, Jeff said he knew where to locate him and would pass the word in the morning. Buster said to tell Julian that George from up north sent him. Well, after them boys left out, Buster, Walter, Howard, and Jesse just sit a spell and talked about home and life and such. They had it pretty darn good, and all of them felt blessed, but all of them agreed some of this stuff they was a-hearing just didn't sit right with what they'd been taught and knowed all their lives. Not that some of it couldn't be true, but it sure couldn't take the place of God and Jesus Christ and the Holy Ghost. Well, sitting there by the fire in the moonlight, Buster says to the boys, you just ain't going to believe this. Over on yonder hill, I seen a blue light. Now, when we come in, I knowed there weren't no houses, no roads up there, or just trees. Boys, I've been watching that light ever since we've been talking. It ain't moved not one bit. He said he thought it might be a hunter with a headlight, but it sure ain't that. What Buster said is that light looked like it was staring him right in the middle of his eyeballs and plumb through his skull. Just then, it just took off like greased lightning. Didn't just go out, just took off. Something funny going on here, he exclaimed. Well, the rest of the boys knowed he wasn't a-telling no tale, and Jesse said he seed it for a minute, but didn't think nothing of it. It got all the boys a-thinking for sure. After a while, they all turned in and started to snow. The fire burned down low, and they had all full bellies and warm sleeping bags. They all slept like a log. Now, in the night, Walter said the next morning he heard something traipsing round about outside the tent, but marked it off as a wen or a cow or maybe a deer. Well, Howard said the tracks sure wasn't none he'd ever seen before, and there was a smell like he ain't never smelled before either. He did see some mountain lion tracks, though. There was a big one, big as his hand, and a smaller one, too. Well, so the boys figured they all had been visited by something or somebody. Right strange, to say the least. They ate a good hearty breakfast, and they went to exploring while waiting for word from Julia. Well, Jesse and Buster done found some Injun beads and picked up about 500 of them out of the sand to take home. Walter just dearly loved to walk, so he lit out on the trail down the mountain across the creek. Howard went up the mountain after seeing some type of critter he ain't never seen before. Well, right about 10 o'clock, Buster and Jesse seed Howard hightailing it down that mountain. There was a big old black bear chasing him, and he was a-gaining. Buster run to get his rifle, but Howard hollered not to shoot. Well, Buster and Jesse didn't know what till Howard stopped at that creek. Howard clumb a little outcropping on a knoll and just sat there. Well, that old bear reared up and roared with Howard just a laughing. Well, Howard reached back and pulled out his handkerchief full of honeycomb. That bear eased up on Howard, licked it clean, and then ambled on off. Howard come on across the creek and told Buster and Jesse what was going on. Well, Howard come up on a beehive and figured to get some fresh honey. Right below him, unbeknownst to Howard, was a mountain lion with her cub. She got right upset that Howard was there and started to get all over Howard. Well, about that time, this big old black bear showed up looking for honey too. The cat and the bear met Hayed up. A snorting and a snarling, they tangled a mite before she took off. Well, Howard done had the honeycomb. He done enticed the bear to come on down the mountain so they could see him. Then he gave him the honey, and the bear went on back to his den to get ready to hibernate according to Hiram. The boys asked him if he was scared. He said, heck no, wasn't no need to be scared. The bear just wanted a little honey, and he knowed Hiram weren't no threat to him. Well, the three of them decided to fix a sandwich for dinner and began to get on out to makings when Walter showed up. Well, he was all out of breath and said we had to see what he done found. Ice cave, he said, a valley the likes you never see. He was a beginning to catch his breath, and we told him to sit on down, and after dinner we'd hike back up there with him. Walter said the trail doubled back and forked, and he decided to take the one going up. Said we'd better take our coats and gloves too. Walter said the old snake pistol was strapped on his leg and was still a raring to go, but the boys got him to settle down and eat dinner and tell him the whole story, which he did. Well, after eating, they all took off to the ice cave. It was the purest and coldest water known to man. It was on the backside of an outcropping at the top of another mountain, and a feller would get plumb breathless unless he took his time to get there. You had to hang on and swing around to get in the entrance, but it could be done safely with each other helping each other. It was cold enough to hang meat for sure, a natural refrigerator and a freezer, and plumb beautiful too. When they all got out and overlooked the valley below, they could see for miles and miles. There was a rock cairn there that the Indians had made, and when you looked through it, you could see like a telescope. It was the most spectacular and magnificent sight of God's natural wonders and perfection and beauty that a man ever whispered or witnessed. Walter was right. He done found a place like no other. It was plumb spiritual. They all bowed their heads and said a prayer right then and there. Ain't no spaceman done that, they all said. Well, after being all agog and all, the boys headed on back down to camp. When they got there, Injun Julian sat there by the fire, Injun style, just to meditate. The boys tried not to disturb the feller, but he knowed they was a-comin' before they even seen him. He didn't have no truck, no horse, no other means of transportation, and was by hisself. He got up real slow-like and shook all their hands and asked if they'd liked what they saw since they'd been here, especially the valley and the ice cave. Well, they asked him how in the world he knowed that, and he said, just like I know y'all have beads and Brother Bear protected you, Hired. Now, ain't that something, they said. Ain't no way you could know all that, they said, and Julian just laughed. Sit down and we'll talk, he said to the boys. Well, Hired put on the coffee pot and got out some snacks to serve and settled in for the discussion. Julian come because John projected him, and George sent word by their friends. Well, Jesse piped up and said, you don't mean by them spacemen and them spaceships, do you, Julian? Julian said, yes. Well, that set them all back on their ears a bit, and Walter was plumb intrigued by all of this here tale, I'm a-telling you. Have to admit, Buster and Jesse had their mouths wide open, and Hired was just a-grinning like he done left this here earth. Well, Julian began to explain some of the many wonders and unanswered questions of the universe. When he asked them to follow him, they all got up and went to the face of a cliff about 500 yards from camp. Well, Julian showed them the same symbols they seen at George's place and what John told them. Then to take the cake, there was pictures, very old pictures on the rock that showed hunting scenes and six-toed giants and spacemen and spaceships. The boys were completely hornswoggled by all that and knowed the proof was a staring them right in the face. Those pictures was for real. No fake stuff here. They all sat down under the rock shelf that protected the pictures and asked Julian questions. He told them he would answer what he could, but could not tell them some things he wasn't allowed to. He wouldn't say no more about that neither. He did say that they was real special to be allowed this knowledge and they must hold it dear. He also said that their friend Jim Rogers knowed some things about all this and trusted the boys with more in his life. He was told that he could trust them. Well, that left the boys scratching their heads, I tell you. About that time, Walter and Buster jumped right in the middle of this conversation and told Julian that they believed in the Lord Jesus Christ and they didn't put nothing in front of him. Well, Julian was real quiet-like and says to each of the boys, you was placed on this earth by God for the opportunity to serve him. You are being given special knowledge to assist you in his mission. You do not have to accept it, but he wishes that you would. He knows each and every one of you better than you know yourselves. Well, you four young men have a special bond, alike and unalike, but united. Have you not seen many miracles, much proof of your faith in your living God? Have you not been afforded opportunities unimagined? Are you not blessed beyond measure? Follow him and his messengers, and you shall know Was it not asked of each of you if you wish to know 3 times? Well, the boys were plumb dumbfounded by all this, and Julian said when they left from this place of the paranormal, their lives would be changed forever, whether or not they accepted God's mission or not. Well, each one of the boys said they was going to do whatever God wanted to do, but it was hard to believe some things. Julian said to just be open to the prompting of the heart by the Holy Spirit, no matter what form it come in. Now, Jesse and Buster weren't no naysayers, but some of this was a hard pill to swallow. Julian told them that too. He said that it was good to examine the right path, but that it was also good to follow on faith alone. That's why all 4 of them was chosen. But Julian asked the boys if they would like to attend a special ceremony the Indians held sacred and only chosen ones could attend. Of course, the boys said yes. So Julian said to follow me. Now, the boys been all over this part of the mountain where they was a-camping and never seen what they saw now. There was a huge 5-story lodge that went down in the ground with drum beats coming up from inside with someone a-chanting. Julian told the boys to strip down to their shorts and follow him. Somehow, he just showed up in a loincloth. They followed him on into the lodge, and it was hotter than blazes in there. Julian took all the boys down to the first level and set them in front. All of their other Indians just stared at him with their mouths open. Julian got up in front of them all and said they was the ones the Great Spirit chose for this earth, and they was brothers of the clan. Now, Hirons weren't scared of no snake, but the rattlers they let loose in there was none too friendly, it seemed. The boys started to hightail it out of there, but Julian asked them if they had faith. Well, Buster said, yeah, but good sense too. Julian smiled at that, but just said to sit still. Well, them dang snakes was a-crawling everywhere and a-rattling up a storm. It was plumb frightful, to tell you the truth. They was ready to bolt. Then Walter spoke up and said, hold the line, boys, hold the line. Well, that done it. They all settled down and watched the ceremony. John done come in there too. Now, how in tarnation did he get here? Then George was a-talking. Then Jim come up to the boys a-grinning and touched each of their hides. Them snakes was a-crawling all over everybody, but they didn't feel them on their skin. That was a funny thing for sure. Then all of a sudden the drum stopped beating and all was quiet. Julian come up to each of the boys and poured something on their heads and put an amulet around each of their necks. There was some funny words spoken, and then nothing, and nobody was there. There they was, sat in their drawers on the ground, with snow was beginning to fall, and it was plumb dark too. Julian, Snakes, Injuns, the lodge, Jim, George, and John was all gone. The boys looked at each other and just sat there in wonder and amazement. And Jesse says, what was that all about? Walter spoke up and then said, we been chose, boys. We gonna do what's right and honorable and help with all we got for our fellow man. Ain't we on one accord about that? Why do you think we come into all this wealth for? Just to feather our own nest? You all know ain't one of us like that. Well, they all got up and dressed and talked away into the night. After breakfast the next day, they packed up and left on out. When they come off of the mountain, they run into Jeff as he was riding his horse up towards the boys. He stopped them and told them he was awful sorry, but Julian was nowhere to be found and was sorry he didn't get the message to him that they wanted to see him. Well, the boys' eyes got water than pie plates, and then they started into laughing. Jeff didn't know what to make of all that, and the boys said thanks anyway, but they was heading on home. Life began for the boys that day. As growed men now with families and responsibilities, they still hold the line. P.S. They did stop to take Jesse four-wheeling in the sand dunes in Oklahoma and to see his and Uncle Cecil in Weatherford. Y'all have a blessed day. Old Buster signing out. Thank you now.